My boyfriend died. What I did next still haunts me. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would write something like this. I've read posts like this before, usually late at night when I couldn't sleep, scrolling endlessly and feeling relieved that whatever mess I was dealing with wasn't that bad. I used to think those people were brave for putting everything out there. Now I just feel tired, ashamed, and desperate to get this out of my head. This isn't something I've told anyone in my real life. Not fully. Not honestly. The people who know pieces of it don't know how deep it goes, or how much it's been eating away at me from the inside. I don't even know if I'm looking for forgiveness here. I think I just want someone to hear it without knowing me, without looking at me differently afterward. My boyfriend, Aaron, died suddenly 2 years ago. Even writing that sentence still feels unreal. Like I'm talking about someone else's life, someone else's loss. Aaron and I were together for a little over 4 years. We met in college, moved in together after graduation, and built what felt like a quiet, stable life. Nothing flashy, just comfortable. Safe. The kind of relationship you assume will always be there because it always has been. Aaron was gentle in a way that made you feel calm just being near him. He wasn't loud or dramatic. He remembered small things. The way I liked my coffee. The songs I skipped every time they came on. He was the person I thought I would grow old with, not because it was some romantic fantasy, but because it felt obvious. The night he died, we argued over something stupid. I don't even remember what it was anymore. Probably dishes, or money, or one of those arguments that feel important in the moment and meaningless later. He went out for a drive to clear his head. That was something he did sometimes. He liked driving at night. He never came back. A drunk driver ran a red light. That's what the police told me. Quick, instant, no pain. They always say that part like it helps. I remember sitting on the floor of our apartment after they left, staring at the door, waiting for him to walk through it and laugh and tell me it was all some horrible mistake. I remember calling his phone over and over, even though I knew no one would answer. The weeks after that are a blur. Funeral arrangements. His parents. My parents. People bringing food I didn't eat. Everyone telling me how strong I was while I felt like I was hollowed out from the inside. Sleeping on his side of the bed because the other side felt wrong. Keeping his clothes because they still smelled like him. Aaron's best friend, Matt, was there through all of it. They'd been best friends since high school, practically inseparable. Matt was louder than Aaron, more sarcastic, more openly emotional. Where Aaron was steady, Matt was intense. They balanced each other out. I always joked that Matt was the chaos and Aaron was the anchor. Matt was at the hospital with me that first night. He held my hand while I cried. He stood next to me at the funeral. He helped me pack up Aaron's things when I couldn't bring myself to do it alone. When people started going back to their normal lives and the messages slowed down, Matt didn't disappear. He checked on me every day. At first, that felt like a lifeline. Someone who knew Aaron the way I did. Someone who understood the loss without needing it explained. We talked about Aaron constantly. Shared memories. Laughed and cried in the same conversation. It felt like keeping Aaron alive in some small way. I didn't think anything of it when Matt started coming over more often. Cooking dinner with me. Sitting on the couch watching shows we'd all watched together before. Sleeping on the other end of the couch when it got late. I told myself it was normal. Healthy, even. Two people supporting each other through grief. Everyone told me how lucky I was to have him. I believed them. There were nights when the grief felt so heavy I couldn't breathe, and Matt would just sit there with me in silence. No fixing, no advice, just presence. It felt safe, familiar, like the pain was being split between two people instead of crushing me alone. Looking back now, I can see how blurred the boundaries became. But at the time, I genuinely didn't notice. Or maybe I didn't want to. We started texting constantly. Morning check-ins, late-night conversations. He was the first person I went to when I woke up from nightmares. He knew when the anniversaries were, when the grief hit hardest. He remembered dates even I tried to forget. Sometimes he'd say things like, "Aaron would be so proud of you," or "He'd be glad we have each other." That sentence should have stopped me cold. Instead, it comforted me. About 6 months after Aaron died, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden realization or moment where everything changed. It was subtle, quiet, like the tide pulling back before you realize the water's gone too far. One night, Matt stayed over later than usual. We'd been drinking wine and talking about Aaron, about how unfair everything felt, about how lonely the future looked. I remember feeling exhausted, emotionally wrung out, like my chest physically hurt from carrying so much sadness. I cried, harder than I had in weeks. Matt hugged me, and he didn't let go. It wasn't sexual. Not at first. It was just close, too close, his hand on my back, my face against his chest, his heartbeat under my ear. I should have pulled away. I didn't. When he kissed my forehead, I froze. Not because I wanted it, but because my body didn't know how to react. Grief does strange things to you. It rewires your instincts. Comfort starts to blur with need. He apologized immediately, said it was a mistake, said he shouldn't have done that, said he was just trying to comfort me. I nodded, said it was okay, said I understood. But something had already crossed a line. After that night, things changed. We didn't talk about it, but we both felt it. There was an awareness between us that hadn't existed before. Every touch felt charged, every silence heavy. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself grief was playing tricks on me. I told myself I was still Aaron's girlfriend, even though he was gone. And then one night, I did something I can never take back. I wish I could say that what happened next was sudden, that it came out of nowhere, that I was overwhelmed and not in my right mind. The truth is worse than that. The truth is that it happened slowly enough that I could have stopped it at several points, and I didn't. After that night, Matt didn't stop coming over, but the energy between us shifted. We were more careful with our words, like we were both aware of how fragile the situation was and how easily it could shatter. At the same time, there was a pull between us that felt impossible to ignore. Not attraction in the way I'd felt it before in other relationships, but something heavier. Something rooted in shared pain. We still talked about Aaron constantly, his habits, his jokes, the stupid things he used to do that annoyed us. Sometimes it felt like Matt and I were the only two people in the world who remembered him the right way. Everyone else talked about Aaron like he was frozen in time, like a saint, like a perfect memory. Matt and I talked about him as a real person, flaws and all. That intimacy made everything feel justified. I remember thinking that if anyone could understand what I was going through, it was Matt. And if anyone could understand what Matt was going through, it was me. That logic became the foundation for everything that followed. The first time we crossed the line completely wasn't planned. At least, that's what I tell myself. It was late. We'd been drinking again. I was emotionally exhausted, worn down from pretending to be okay all day. Matt was sitting close to me on the couch, closer than usual. Our knees touched. Neither of us moved away. I said something about how lonely the nights felt, how quiet the apartment was without Aaron, how sometimes I felt like I was disappearing. Matt looked at me in a way that made my stomach drop. Not pity, not sympathy, something deeper. Something that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt since Aaron died. He told me I wasn't alone. He kissed me. This time, I kissed him back. I can't even fully describe the feeling. It wasn't passion. It wasn't excitement. It was desperation, like grabbing onto something solid while drowning, like needing warmth so badly that you don't question where it comes from. The moment it was over, the guilt hit me like a wave. I pulled away and started crying. Not quiet tears. Ugly, shaking sobs that felt like my body was rejecting what I'd just done. Matt panicked. He kept apologizing, saying he shouldn't have done it, that he never wanted to hurt me or disrespect Aaron. That made it worse. Because deep down, I knew it wasn't just his fault. I told him we couldn't do that again, that it was wrong, that Aaron would hate us for it. Matt agreed immediately. He promised it would never happen again, that he'd crossed a line and regretted it. For a few weeks, we tried to go back to how things were before. Less contact, fewer late nights, more space. But the damage was already done. The kiss hung between us like a secret neither of us could ignore. Every interaction felt loaded. Every silence begged to be filled. I started thinking about him in ways that made me feel sick with shame, comparing how different he was from Aaron, how present he felt, how responsive, how alive. I hated myself for those thoughts. And yet they kept coming. The next time it happened, there was no alcohol, no heightened emotions, no excuses. We were sitting at the kitchen table, talking about something mundane, and suddenly it felt unbearable to keep pretending nothing was happening. Matt reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. That night, we slept together. I don't remember much about the physical details, and honestly, I'm grateful for that. What I remember is the weight of it. The sense that something irreversible had just happened, that I'd crossed a boundary I could never uncross. Afterward, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling like I'd betrayed Aaron in the most profound way possible. Like I'd erased him, like I'd replaced him. Matt was asleep beside me, his breathing slow and even like nothing had changed. That hurt more than I expected. The next morning, neither of us knew what to say. We didn't talk about what it meant. We didn't label it. We just existed in this uncomfortable in-between space where it had happened, but we hadn't acknowledged the consequences. I told myself it was a mistake, a one-time lapse. Grief does strange things, right? But it wasn't a one-time thing. It kept happening. At first, it was sporadic. Then it became routine. Matt was over almost every night. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. Sometimes we pretended we were just comforting each other. Other times, we stopped pretending altogether. I lived in a constant state of cognitive dissonance. Part of me felt comforted, connected, even cared for. Another part of me felt like I was slowly rotting from the inside out. I'd look at photos of Aaron and feel physically ill. I avoided his parents because I couldn't stand the idea of them looking at me with trust. The worst part was that Matt and I started building something new on top of Aaron's absence. Inside jokes, shared routines, a quiet understanding that we never talked about out loud. It felt wrong, and it felt inevitable. I told myself that Aaron would want me to be happy, that he wouldn't want me to be alone forever, that love doesn't just disappear because someone dies. Those thoughts helped me sleep at night, until the guilt came roaring back in the morning. Everything fell apart when someone else noticed. A mutual friend asked me, casually, if Matt had been staying over a lot. She said it in a joking tone, but there was something in her eyes that made my stomach drop. I laughed it off, made an excuse, changed the subject. But once the question was out there, I realized how obvious it must have been, how thin the walls of secrecy really were. Not long after that, Matt told me people were starting to talk, that his parents had asked questions, that Aaron's mom had mentioned how nice it was that he was taking such good care of me. That comment destroyed me. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I felt like I was living a lie that was about to explode and take everything with it. I told Matt we had to stop. He didn't argue. He just looked tired. He said he didn't know how to lose me too. That sentence stuck with me, because it framed the situation like we were both victims of circumstance, instead of people making choices that hurt others. We tried to pull back again, create distance, reestablish boundaries. But this time, the damage was too deep. I was already emotionally entangled, already dependent, already tied to him in ways that had nothing to do with Aaron anymore. And when the truth finally came out, it didn't come gently. It came like a wrecking ball. I didn't plan to tell anyone. Not then. Not ever if I could help it. I thought the truth would stay contained between Matt and me, ugly but hidden, something we'd eventually bury and move past. That illusion shattered the day Aaron's mom showed up at my apartment unannounced. She stood in the doorway holding a small box, one of Aaron's old watches that she'd found while cleaning out a drawer. She said she thought I should have it, that it belonged with me. I felt my throat close instantly. She stepped inside and looked around, smiling softly, commenting on how the place still felt like Aaron. She said his presence lingered here, that she felt close to him when she visited. I nodded, I smiled, I lied with my entire body. Then she asked, gently, how Matt was doing. Something in her tone made my stomach drop. Not suspicion exactly. Curiosity. Concern. She said she'd noticed he'd been very involved lately, that she was grateful he'd been there for me, that Aaron would have wanted that. I don't know what expression crossed my face, but whatever it was made her pause. She asked me quietly if everything was okay. And I broke. Not completely, not with a full confession, but enough that she knew something was wrong. My eyes filled with tears. My hands started shaking. I couldn't meet her gaze. She didn't push. She didn't accuse. She just told me I looked exhausted. That grief does terrible things to people, that I didn't have to be strong for her. When she left, I collapsed on the floor and sobbed harder than I had since Aaron died. That was the moment I realized the secret wasn't just eating me alive. It was poisoning everything around me. I told Matt we had to come clean. That someone else deserved to hear the truth before rumors twisted it into something worse. That Aaron's family couldn't find out through whispers. He panicked. He said it would destroy them, that they'd never forgive us, that Aaron's memory would be tainted forever. He said we were already living with enough guilt and didn't need to add more. I realized then that we were no longer aligned. I wanted accountability. He wanted containment. The tension between us grew unbearable. Conversations turned into arguments. Arguments turned into silence. And in that silence, resentment began to grow. I started to see Matt differently. Not as a lifeline, not as comfort, but as someone who benefited from my confusion, from my vulnerability, from my grief. That realization made me feel sick. A few weeks later, the truth came out anyway. Not from me. Not from Matt. From someone else. A mutual friend saw us together one night. Not just close, not ambiguous, together. She didn't confront us. She told someone else, and that person told someone else, and suddenly the thing I'd been trying to control escaped completely. The messages started pouring in. Some were confused, some were angry, some were cruel. People asked how long it had been going on, whether Aaron knew, whether I'd loved him at all, whether Matt had always been waiting in the wings. I stopped answering my phone. Aaron's sister texted me late one night, just one sentence. I don't understand how you could do this to him. I stared at that message until my vision blurred. Matt and I fought constantly after that, not about Aaron, about blame, about responsibility, about who crossed the line first, about who owed who more. And that's when I realized something that made everything even worse. Whatever we had wasn't love. It was trauma. It was two broken people clinging to each other in the wreckage, mistaking proximity for connection, mistaking familiarity for safety. Once the secrecy was gone, so was whatever illusion had held us together. We stopped touching, stopped sleeping together, stopped pretending. The final argument was quiet. No yelling, no dramatics. I told him I couldn't do it anymore, that I hated who I'd become, that I hated waking up every day feeling like I was betraying a dead man who had trusted me completely. He didn't try to stop me. He just said, I never meant for it to end like this. I almost laughed, because there was no other way it could have ended. Matt moved out of my life slowly. Fewer texts, longer gaps, eventually nothing. He disappeared the same way he'd entered, quietly, without ceremony. The fallout lingered much longer. Some friends distanced themselves, others stayed but treated me differently. I felt marked, defined by the worst thing I'd ever done. No matter how much time passed, that version of me followed me everywhere. I went to therapy for the first time shortly after, not because I wanted absolution, but because I didn't recognize myself anymore. I needed someone to help me untangle grief from guilt, loneliness from self-destruction. The hardest thing I had to accept was this. I wasn't a villain, but I wasn't a victim either. I was a grieving person who made selfish choices and hurt people who didn't deserve it. And I had to live with that. Years passed. The intensity faded, but the lesson stayed. I learned how fragile boundaries become when you're desperate for relief, how easily pain can masquerade as connection, how grief doesn't excuse harm, even when it explains it. I don't know if Aaron would forgive me. I don't try to imagine it anymore. All I can do is carry the weight honestly, learn from it, and never let myself cross that line again. Because some mistakes don't just change your life. They change who you are. After everything came out, after the messages and the silence and the quiet judgment that followed me everywhere, my life didn't collapse in a dramatic way. There was no single moment where everything fell apart. Instead, it shrank. Slowly, subtly, like a room getting smaller without you noticing until you can barely move. People stopped inviting me places. Not aggressively, not with confrontation, just fewer messages, fewer check-ins, conversations that felt polite but shallow. I became someone people didn't quite know how to talk to anymore. I understood why. I was a reminder of something uncomfortable, of grief gone wrong, of a line people hope they'll never cross but secretly fear they might. The apartment felt unbearable after Matt disappeared. Every corner held too many memories. Aaron's presence was still there, but now it was tangled with shame. I stopped sleeping in the bedroom and spent nights on the couch, scrolling until my eyes burned, just to avoid my own thoughts. I moved out a few months later, packed up what I could, left behind what I couldn't face. I didn't take the watch Aaron's mom had given me. I couldn't. It felt wrong to carry it with me. I thought leaving would help. It didn't. Grief has a way of traveling with you. I threw myself into work because it was the only place I could disappear without being questioned. I worked late, took on extra projects, volunteered for things I didn't care about just to avoid going home. People praised my dedication. They had no idea it was avoidance. Therapy became the one place I didn't have to perform, where I could say the ugliest parts out loud without watching someone's expression change. My therapist didn't excuse what I'd done, but she didn't reduce me to it either. She asked me once who I was punishing by holding on to the guilt so tightly. I said myself. She asked me what that punishment had accomplished. I didn't have an answer. Around the second anniversary of Aaron's death, something unexpected happened. His mom reached out. I hadn't heard from her since the day she visited my apartment. I assumed she'd pieced things together, or been told, or sensed enough to pull away quietly. Her message was short. She asked if I'd like to get coffee. I almost said no. I was terrified of what she might say, of what I might see in her eyes. Anger, disappointment, betrayal. We met at a small cafe near her house. She looked older. Grief ages people in a way nothing else does. We sat across from each other, hands wrapped around mugs neither of us drank from. She didn't bring up Matt. She didn't accuse me. She talked about Aaron. She told me she still thought about him every day, that she missed the way he laughed, the way he made things feel calm. She said losing him felt like losing her sense of time, like life had been split into before and after. I listened, barely breathing. Then she said something I never expected. She said grief makes people reach for comfort wherever they can find it. That she'd seen it tear families apart, turn people into versions of themselves they didn't recognize. She said she didn't condone everything that happened, but she understood that pain doesn't always make us better people. She told me she hoped I was learning to forgive myself. I cried right there in the cafe, quietly but uncontrollably. I apologized through tears, not for one specific thing, but for everything. For failing Aaron, for failing her, for becoming someone I never thought I'd be. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She said Aaron loved me, that she believed that with her whole heart, and that whatever else had happened didn't erase that. That conversation didn't absolve me, but it softened something I'd been gripping too hard. After that, I started to live again in small ways. I made new friends who didn't know my past. I let myself enjoy things without immediately punishing myself for it. I laughed without feeling like I was doing something wrong. I dated again eventually, carefully, honestly, I told people up front that I carried complicated grief, that I'd made mistakes, that I wasn't proud of everything in my past. Some people walked away. Some stayed. The ones who stayed listened, without trying to rewrite my story into something more comfortable. I never spoke to Matt again, not directly. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he moved away, changed jobs, tried to start over. I don't know if he found peace. I don't know if he's still carrying the guilt the way I am. I hope he learned something from it. I know I did. I learned that grief doesn't excuse harm, even when it explains it. That love doesn't protect you from making selfish choices. That being broken doesn't mean you're blameless. But I also learned that one terrible chapter doesn't have to define an entire life. I still miss Aaron. I always will. Some losses don't fade. They just become part of who you are. And I still live with the weight of what I did. But I no longer let it consume me. I tell this story not because I'm proud of it, and not because I expect understanding from everyone who hears it. I tell it because silence almost destroyed me, and honesty, however painful, is the only thing that helped me rebuild. If there's anything I hope people take from this, it's this. Grief makes you vulnerable in ways you don't recognize until it's too late. Protect your boundaries. Be honest about your pain. And if you make a mistake that can't be undone, face it fully, because running from it only deepens the damage. Some lines, once crossed, stay with you forever. All you can do after that is decide who you become in the aftermath. For a long time, I thought the worst thing that could happen to a person was loss. I thought grief was the ultimate pain, the kind that reshapes you whether you want it to or not. And while I still believe grief is one of the most powerful forces a human can experience, I've come to understand that it's not the most dangerous one. The most dangerous thing is what grief can convince you to justify. When Aaron died, I didn't just lose the person I loved. I lost my sense of direction, my internal compass, the quiet certainty that told me who I was and what lines I would never cross. And in that confusion, I let comfort become more important than integrity. That's the part people don't talk about enough. Grief doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like attachment, like clinging, like telling yourself that something feels right simply because it makes the pain quieter for a moment. Sometimes it convinces you that survival is more important than values. And when you're hurting badly enough, that argument sounds reasonable. I've spent years thinking about where exactly I went wrong, trying to pinpoint the moment everything became irreversible. And what I've realized is that it wasn't one decision. It was a series of small ones, harmless ones that felt compassionate, even necessary at the time. Answering one extra message. Letting someone stay a little longer. Not speaking up when something felt off. Convincing myself that intent mattered more than impact. That's how boundaries erode, not in dramatic moments, but in quiet ones. I think people like to believe betrayal only happens to bad people, that it's driven by malice or selfishness or cruelty. But the truth is, betrayal often starts with pain and silence and unspoken needs. It starts when someone doesn't ask for help in the right way, and another person offers comfort without limits. None of that makes it okay. Understanding why you did something doesn't undo the harm it causes. That was one of the hardest lessons for me to accept. For a long time, I wanted my grief to be an excuse. I wanted it to explain away the damage, to soften the consequences. But grief doesn't absolve you of responsibility. It just explains how you got there. And if you don't take responsibility, you don't actually heal. You just carry the damage forward and pass it on. I also learned something uncomfortable about loyalty. Loyalty isn't proven when things are easy. It's proven when you're desperate, lonely, and hurting, when you have every reason to reach for comfort in the wrong place and choose not to. Loyalty isn't just about who you love. It's about who you refuse to betray, even when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching. If I could speak to the version of myself from those early months after Erin died, I wouldn't shame her. I wouldn't yell or judge or call her weak. I would tell her this. You are allowed to grieve. You are allowed to need help. You are allowed to feel lonely. But you are not allowed to destroy someone else's memory or your own sense of self just to escape the pain. Comfort that costs you your integrity is never worth it. I know some people will hear this story and decide I'm a terrible person. Others will try to justify what I did. Neither reaction really matters anymore. What matters is that I learned, too late but still fully. That healing doesn't come from avoiding pain. It comes from facing it honestly. It comes from choosing boundaries, even when they hurt. From choosing truth over secrecy. From choosing growth over numbness. Grief doesn't make you who you are. What you do while grieving does. And if there's one thing I hope people take from this, it's this. If you're hurting, speak up, but don't cross lines you can't uncross. If you're comforting someone in pain, protect both of you with boundaries. And if you make a mistake that can't be undone, don't run from it. Own it. Learn from it. Let it change you for the better. Some lessons come at a terrible cost. The only way to honor that cost is to make sure it wasn't for nothing.